Hi guys, it's Lydia here. Welcome back to The Weird Years. This is the podcast where we're normalising the discussion of the meltdown-inducing questions that hit in your 30s. And this week we're talking about sex. Let's be honest, it's on a lot of our minds, a lot of the time, but maybe we don't talk about it enough. If, like me, you're nosy, then it is something that probably comes up over dinner with your friends. You're having dinner, a few glasses of wine, someone's having some challenges, and sex will often come up. Whether that is a friend who's going through a relationship challenge, and someone might ask, like, are you guys still having sex? Or like, is the sex okay? What's going on there? Or you hear that a couple just broke up and somebody else might jump in with, well, I heard they hadn't had sex for months, so I guess it's been on the cards for a while. And something that also often comes up in this time is, how often is enough? Like, what is normal? Is there a normal when it comes to sex in your 30s? Am I having enough? Am I having too much? What is going on when it comes to sex? How is my relationship with sex? And here's the twist, because millennials are actually having less sex than the generations before us at our age. The data shows that the desire hasn't gone away, but for some reason we are having less sex than a lot of us would like to be having. And look, obviously there's so many reasons for that. We live much busier lives probably at this age than the generations before us. We might have different living conditions. If you're moving back home and you're saving for a house, maybe you don't want to be having sex in your parents' spare room. Or perhaps you are single and therefore at a certain age, the dynamic with sex outside of relationships just kind of changes. There's loads of reasons why we might not be having sex. Stress is also shown to be a massive factor in the data, that we are constantly in our heads and really, really busy. And sex, unfortunately, is sometimes collateral damage to that. And it might also have quite a lot to do with the sexual scripts that we grew up on. Let's be honest, when it comes to sex education, we're not taught that much. We're taught a bit of the biology, maybe we're putting condoms on bananas, but it's really a very surface level approach. We're almost given this script about sex and sexuality and intimacy from the media and from films that kind of plugs our gap of where we learn about our sexual scripts when we were teenagers or in our early 20s. And unfortunately, that script is very kind of male-centric. It's often very much focused on penetration and it's focused on climax and, doing the deed rather than all the things that lead up to intimacy ultimately, and not just sex itself. And it's no surprise really that in our 30s, many of us get to this point and we start thinking about our relationship and our dynamic with sex because we're feeling disconnected, or maybe we feel like we've been performative so many years of our lives. And that is absolutely not what sex should be like in our 30s, right? So I am very excited to welcome today's guest, Emma-Louise Boynton. She is a journalist, she's a writer, she hosts amazing events called Sex Talks, and she's coming on today to talk all about pleasure and the origins of this and what it might mean in your weird years. I first met Emma at one of her Sex Talk events, which are often her and a guest talking about a topic within sex. And what's really interesting about her events and what I loved was that at the end, people could write anonymous kind of questions and her and the guest would answer those, which I just thought was so interesting, and to have a really open forum about sex. And that's kind of what she does. She takes on taboo topics within sex, or even the topic of sex itself is taboo to many people, right? We talk in this episode about the landscape of sex that we might have grown up in. And we also talk about how it's really impossible to decouple how you feel in yourself and in your body from sex itself. Ultimately, it's an intimate act, but she talks a lot about how her own journey of overcoming a difficult relationship with her body and leading her into becoming much more comfortable in herself and ultimately unlocking what desire and pleasure look like for her. She throws up lots of thoughts around sex that I had never even considered, to be honest. My own relationship, I think, to sex, or where some of those views have come from. I think you'll find it really relatable as well. And let's be honest, none of us are getting through the weird years without having a conversation about sex. So that is enough from me. Let's get into it. If life feels like a whirlwind of clarity and confusion, pull up a chair. Welcome to The Weird Years. Well, Emma-Louise, welcome to the beige couch.
Oh, thank you so much. What a gorgeous beige couch this is. And I love that we're like immersed in nature. It's a very nice backdrop to a sex chat.
Yes, it is. It is. And we've both worn dark clothes. We're in the kind of, I like this actual little leopard number.
Yeah, little like summer shorts. It's the hottest day of the year. I'm absolutely baking. So I thought, but actually the studio is quite nice and cool. So
Thank the Lord for air conditioning.
Exactly.
I'm so excited to chat to you today because I came across you, I think it must have been like a year and a half ago now, maybe longer, with one of your sex talks. I've actually been to a few of them and they're amazing. For anyone who doesn't know what sex talks is and what you do, I would love a little overview.
Yes. Oh, I love hearing that, first of all, and thank you so much for coming to the event. We met at an event ages ago. I remember meeting and being like, but yeah, so Sex Talks is a live event series that exists to engender more open, honest and vulnerable conversations around typically taboo topics like sex, intimacy, desire, relationships, all the things I think we are brought up not really being given the language or vocabulary with which to talk about. And the reason I want to do a live event series, it's also recorded as a podcast. Everything has been on pause recently, so I've been writing a book, but it's relaunching in September. But the reason I want to do a live event series is I felt it was so important to have these conversations in person, in a room full of people where we can all sit shoulder to shoulder, having conversations that are typically taboo, that we are usually kind of brought up thinking are shameful and we shouldn't talk about, but have them in a room full of people so that even if someone is, in the audience and they're not going to necessarily ask a question or don't really want to be super chatty that evening, but they can still intake that information and alongside other people in the knowledge that they're sitting alongside of a room full of people who are equally as curious and often embarrassed as they are when it comes to these topics.
Totally. And also, I think like matching the topic to the forum is so important. Like,
yes,
we cannot have really like long debates or conversations about sex well, I mean, people do on Twitter or like in the comments of TikTok. And I'm like, please, guys, let's take this long form.
100%. And there's no nuance. And I think for me, especially now, I mean, there's so many stories I'm really fascinated in right now. I mean, not least, I'm thinking a lot about Bonnie Blue, reading loads about that and so many issues surrounding it. These are not topics that we can be discussing in kind of one soundbite. I mean, I just posted a few videos about it, but with the idea of, I really want to engender conversations that offer nuance and are always led by curiosity and not shame and not judgment, because this stuff is complex. Like our relationship to sex and to intimacy and to our bodies is informed by so many different factors, both personal, cultural, familial. There's so many different things that are feeding into that, that are both historic and present. And I think that it's kind of, we'd be foolhardy to think that it's, as simple as just, as having a few lines on X, Y, and Z. I think we need to have really in-depth, rigorous conversations and ones that also kind of compel us to question our own viewpoints on things and address our own internalized misogyny, biases, prejudices, shame, all these sorts of things. And that's why I love the live conversational element of what I do, because in the context of a room filled mainly with women, but people of all genders are very welcome, getting to dive deep into the sorts of subjects that I'm fascinated by, often sat next to a fantastic expert, author, whoever, and really get to ask those harder questions and to go deeper and to think and to then also give everyone else in the room the opportunity. I always do an anonymous Q&A at the end of every...
I love this.
It's so good. Because I think especially around a topic like sex, people are, kind of quite often quite shameful about the topic and don't necessarily want to put their hand up and ask a question vocally. But I do them anonymously so that everyone has, under the veil of anonymity, everyone has a question they want to ask when it comes to this topic. So I get, honestly, at the end of every talk, I get a stack, probably about that big. I can never get through them all. And I think to me that feels so emblematic of the fact that so many of us are sitting on such a kind of breadth and depth of questions that we feel are unanswered. And so to be able to create a space in which people can come and have those questions answered and maybe not always have them answered fully, but actually get a conversation going that allows us to kind of question it. But one thing I will add is actually when I relaunched the series, I mentioned I've just been writing a book, which has been the last kind of 6 months. I've been in a bit of a book hole hiatus. But when I relaunch in September, I'm actually kind of slightly rejigging things and kind of expanding it out to really create a kind of world around pleasure. The book club is going to be called The Pleasure Shelf, and it's going to be all under Pleasure Inc. because I think actually kind of echoing so much of the subject of this conversation, there is still such an enduring taboo around sex. And it's been a real issue talking about it online. Like, I can't say sex talks online. I can't say the name of the business that I run on social media, which is my main marketing channel. Yeah. And I want to have as many of these conversations as possible. I want to Trojan horse this stuff into every single room, conversation, everything. And I feel for me, I really want to come slightly, I wouldn't say shifting focus, I'd say expanding focus to be more kind of looking at pleasure as a really broad, expansive subject matter, and also a word that doesn't get banned.
And also, like, the shift from sex to pleasure is so important. But I mean, you're so passionate about this.
So passionate.
I want to get into, like, what got you into talking about sex, researching about sex, this being your special topic?
Oh, it's a great question. And I always say, if you had asked me this question, if you had said to me 5 years ago, Emma, in your career, you'll end up talking about sex and pleasure and orgasms and intimacy, I honestly would have burst out laughing, because my background is in news and current affairs. I studied politics at university, did my master's in psychosocial studies. Interestingly, actually, I was always interested in the politics of sex and desire because of how, massive feminist, and I was always interested in the kind of double standard that we have in our society around, like, purity culture, who gets judged for sex and who doesn't, aka I think in a like heteronormative context, men versus women. So I was always really fascinated by sex. And I think by anything taboo, anytime anyone says, well, we can't talk about that, I'm like, why? Immediately I want to talk about it, hence my interest in politics and sex. The two things we're told not to talk about.
You're not supposed to talk about dinner.
Exactly. But I was always really interested in politics and wanted to do something that I didn't really know what it was, but I wanted to do positive social change. That's all I cared about, but I didn't know what that looked like. So I ended up going into a think tank and then going into the newsroom because I wanted, like, the adrenaline. And I loved it. I loved the kind of fast metabolism of news, and it was every day was different. You were always so stimulated, and always loved storytelling as a medium through which to, I think, convey really important messages and topics I cared about. But I knew I wanted to run my own thing, and knew I wanted to do something in media. So I came back to London in my mid-20s, but I had no idea what I was doing. Classic thing we've just been talking about before we switched on the podcast recording. I think there's kind of, those existential crisis moments end up being so informing, but at the time are awful. But long story short, set up my own media platform that was focused on telling women's stories, but not sexual ones. It was actually mainly focused on women's career stories. It's called Her Hustle, ran it with my best friend. It was a lot of what I was doing now. So it was live event series, podcast. I host the interviews. We actually raised money for the business just before lockdown. It was going really well. We did our biggest event before lockdown. But then the pandemic hit, and a live events business wasn't so great for the pandemic. But at the same time, I went to a party and I never really spoke about sex. It wasn't something that was part of my lexicon because I'd not grown up in a household in which we spoke openly about sex at all. Sex was not discussed at our dinner table. It will be at mine. But it was just, and my sex education, like so many people's, was terrible. But for whatever reason, at this dinner party, I think because I was surrounded by strangers, it was kind of, friend of a friend, I felt maybe emboldened because of that anonymity. And, I said to the girls around me, I was like, I'm just not a sexual person. I don't really enjoy sex. I can't orgasm in partnered sex. Like, I have a bad relationship to it. And these two girls on either side of me turned to me in horror. And they were like, Emma, this is something that you can change. And I was like, huh? They're like, you can change your relationship to sex. And it turns out both of them had just gone and seen a sex therapist, Alex, separately. And they handed me her number and they said, you have to call her. So a few days later, I was like, you can't fix a relationship to sex. This is kind of set in stone. I thought I was broken. I thought I was fundamentally broken. There was something wrong with me.
Did you think it was something physiological out of interest?
It's a good question. I thought it was, I thought that I'd grown up with an eating disorder, and so I had a really bad relationship to my body. Right. And so that kind of disconnect had really informed how I lived in my body and how I saw my body. And I think had always cut me off from a capacity for pleasure because I saw my body through the prism of pain and punishment. It was something that I needed to control, to shrink, to put on diets, to kind of whip into shape. Right. We're the same age, grew up in the noughties. It was a toxic time. And it's making a return. So, but so I think I'd had this very disconnected relationship to my body, which had then really fed into my relationship to sex. because obviously when we have sex, we have to be in our bodies. And so I think that my very toxic relationship to my body, and then alongside a culture that I think, I'd been brought up thinking that kind of sex was for men's pleasure, not my own. I didn't really have any information about sex growing up. What I saw on the OC, honestly, Marissa having sex with Ryan was my sex education. And we didn't see much.
And also it was always walking into a room and tearing clothes off.
Oh my
That's
gosh,
the weirdest thing that
no foreplay, which also shouldn't be called foreplay, all focus on penetration.
Exactly.
No conversation, what do you like, what feels good. It was just you kind of sat on him and that was it. So I think by the time I was in my late 20s and, I had a long relationship in which, we had amazing intimate connection, but I wasn't in command of my body and I didn't know what I liked and I didn't feel confident enough to vocalize it or even explore it. And so once I'd broken up with that partner at the beginning of my 20s, I stopped being able to orgasm.
Wow.
So I ended up going to see the sex therapist. I thought, fuck it. And I found the experience utterly transformative because, one of the first things that she said to me is this amazing sex therapist called Alex Triculia, who is now based in LA and honestly changed my life. And I'm so grateful to her to this day. But she said to me, Emma, for as long as you're at war with your body, you will struggle to enjoy sexual pleasure. And I think when she said that to me, something shifted cognitively that had been just so stuck before, in that for the first time I was able to see my eating disorder, which had kind of manifested in myriad different ways as I'd grown up and got over the worst anorexic part, but then still manifested in lots of different toxic ways as I grew up. It gave this new lens with which to see my relationship to my body and to recognize that I was still stuck in this cycle of self-punishment, and it wasn't just about my relationship to food, but it was about my relationship to pleasure, and it was precluding me from experiencing pleasure in my body. And I think that kind of set in motion some incredible work, therapeutic work that we did together that was really, yes, it was about sex, but it was about so much more. It was about how I lived in my body. It was how I saw my body, how I experienced my body. And it just, it was like this I kind of woke up. And I thought, God, this is wild. Why don't we have better conversations about sex? This is such a fundamental tenet of what it means to be human. And it was after doing that sex, I think we worked together for maybe we were across about kind of 4 months or 5 months. I thought, more people need to have access to this sort of information, these insights. And, I did what I know how to do best. I set up an event series with the idea I just did one event that was about the orgasm gap, pleasure, women's pleasure. I did one event. And I thought, great, let's just do one. Let's see if people like it. It sold out. Did another one. It sold out. As it turned out, I wasn't the only person who craved viscerally better conversation around sex. And that was now coming up to, I think, 4 years ago. Wow. 21. Maybe more than that. That's wild. Gosh.
The idea of sex therapy, to me, in my head, I'm like, I can't even imagine what that would be like. Because I've done most types of therapy, but a lot of CBT, talking about stuff and analysing things. And have you seen Virgin Island?
I actually haven't watched it. I've read loads, but this is so classic me. I don't watch a huge amount. I read loads. So I read about everything and don't watch it, which is useless.
I think it's either Channel 4 or I think it's Channel 4.
Yes, I know Smack Sex just Aisha Paris Smith, who I know really well. She's on it. And it's supposed to be fantastic.
And it's some virgins on an island, and they basically talk so much about what you just said of connection to your body and pleasure and being in your body.
Yes.
I think that's one thing that people, whether it's because you have a bad relationship with your physical body or because your brain is so mentally in another place, that's what I always struggle with, is my head is somewhere else, so I'm not connected to my body. Or even people who are neurodivergent, that feeling of being really connected to your body is actually very difficult but crucial. The only way that you have sexual pleasure, right, is by being inside your body and connected.
And you just think that the society we live in now is constantly pulling us out of our bodies and keeping us in our heads. We live in a tech-driven society in which more and more of our daily lives are lived online, which is a cognitive process. We're sitting on our screens all day, whether it's a laptop, a phone. We kind of are bouncing around all these digital vortexes, which means we're consistently being taken out of our bodies and kept in our heads. And so I think actually it's kind of no surprise that so many of us struggle with embodiment, because we don't live in a society that encourages it or even facilitates it much. And I think actually it's kind of, an act of like quiet rebellion to be able to sit back in your body and spend time in your body in the kind of physical feelings that being in a body entails, because so much of our world is about distraction. And sometimes it can be really uncomfortable sitting in your body because it's not something you're necessarily used to. I mean, for me personally, with growing up with an eating disorder, which so many young women experience in some way, shape or form today, sitting in my body was the most uncomfortable place to be because I had so much hate for my body. So sitting in a kind of present way with my body was painful because I thought, God, I hate this body. This body is too much. I wanted to control the contours of my body so desperately. And particularly as a woman, our bodies change every day because in relationship to our cycle, our bodies are always shape-shifting in so many different ways. And, growing up as someone who wanted to keep this ironclad fist control of my body, I found that so hard. And so I think it is really difficult to be present in our bodies. But as you said so rightly just then, it is so fundamental to being able to enjoy sexual pleasure, and not just sexual pleasure, but pleasure, embodied pleasure. Alex, the sex therapist, said to me once, she said, I think it was when we were talking about kind of in relationship to the eating disorder, but she said, your body has this kind of infinite capacity for pleasure, but you kind of need to make the choice. If you're always going to be denying it and punishing it and thinking in this very negative way, you're not going to be able to access that part of what it can give you. So you kind of need to make a decision as to which one you want to prioritize. So you get this one body, this is your home for life. You don't get an upgrade. You don't get a new one when you turn 50. This is it. So she was like, so make a choice. Do you want to continue living in this kind of disconnected, disembodied way? Or do you want to experience the infinite joys and pleasures that your body has to offer? And I was like, wow. When you put it like that,
obviously
not that hard. Yeah, exactly.
And was the therapy itself very physical? Was it about touch and sensory and being in your body?
No, well, it was talking therapy.
Right.
So in a sense, no. And I think it's a great question because it was the kind of the first step of many to kind of healing, as it were. Because for me, the big shift that had to occur first and foremost was, I guess, kind of a cognitive shift to decide to stop hating my body. So I had to decide to be like, okay, I'm not going to wake up every day and look in the mirror and say horrible things about my body. I'm not going to fixate on my weight in a way that makes me really unhappy in my body. So a lot of it was to do with kind of almost shifting my internal narrative around my body, which our sessions really helped me to do. And then, she would set me different practices, which were about kind of self-pleasure and, I remember one of the things she'd always advised me to do was to seduce myself. So she said, Emma, you've got to learn to seduce yourself. And that, is outside of the context of a romantic situation. So I think we so often equate sex and love and all these things as purely within a relationship dynamic. And actually it's really about your connection to your body and to yourself, first and foremost. So I suddenly was, having long hot baths, which I'd never had before because I hate seeing my body underwater. And, masturbating in a bath, which is really nice.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there was a kind of physical element of it. But I think the shift had to happen at a kind of cerebral level first. And then that helped me step into my body and be like, okay, this is a safe place. And I think that was a big part of it. It was mending the connection between mind and body, which had been so fundamentally broken. And it was saying, okay, my body is a safe place to be, but that means I have to honor my body. And, trigger warning for anyone who's experienced eating disorder. But I'd grown up with bulimia. So that really is quite a fundamental rupture between yourself and your body. And, sex therapy ended 17 years of bulimia because it was the first time I thought, God, I can't do this to my home. I can't inflict this pain on my home anymore. So again, it was mending that rupture that had happened. And then from that, it made living in my body a kind of safer, happier place to be. And then that's where the more kind of practical work started. And I'm fascinated now with somatic therapies and different things like that. But yeah, so it's talking therapy to begin with, though.
This might be a little bit of a jump, but that just made me think of your connection to your body and respect, because I think you're talking about it in the sense of, I presume you're still sexually active at this time, but you just weren't having orgasms, or were you not that active?
I mean, I was, but not because I didn't really like it that much.
Yeah.
The impetus wasn't really. I was I went on dates, but it was such a point of anxiety because I felt I couldn't orgasm. I felt broken. So sex was this big, point of anxiety for me. I'd go on these dates and I'd kind of dread the point at which we'd go home together, because also I didn't feel I had any agency over my sexuality and any enjoyment in it. So I think it just wasn't something that I was, desiring a lot. Whereas sex therapy gave me this, I guess it really also gave me this new language with which to see my body and also to like speak about my body, to begin to explore it in a way that felt exciting.
It's really interesting to me because I feel like I've definitely experienced that disconnect from my body, but gone down a very different route, like probably quite promiscuous when I was younger, like at university and stuff. And I think it was more like a disconnect in almost like a performative way of like, well, I do enjoy this, but maybe like amping up how much I enjoyed things because, you know, the other person enjoys it. And because the reality of like sex, I think as a young woman, like my biggest realization, I think, was when I got to my mid-20s. When I was younger, I thought sexuality was so much power. And I think there is power in sexuality.
Totally.
But the mistake that I had made was like, oh, because someone wants to have sex with you, you have like a power over them or a connection. And then it was only when I got to like my mid-20s, I was like, oh no, a lot of people will just have sex with anyone. Like, I think when I was younger, I was like, this is a, like it must mean that I'm really appealing and I'm really special, that this person like is attracted to me in that way. But then when you get older, unfortunately, the reality is like, especially men, I feel, without making stereotypes, tend to be much more like up for it with anyone.
I think the thing is, which I find really interesting listening to you say that, is that I think at the heart of it, we just have such a poor public cultural conversation around sex, which is underpinned by very pitiful sex education, you know, the UK, across Europe, US, there's numerous studies that consistently show how dissatisfied young people are with the sex education they're getting and how kind of ill-prepared they are to actually go and have sexual relationships.
Yeah.
We're not setting people up for success. And I think with that, everyone's relationship to sex is going to be different because everyone's relationship to their body is different. What is joyful and pleasurable and powerful for you is probably going to be different for me, and then for someone else, and then for someone else. And I think what we all need to be given the tools and the language to do is to discover what makes us feel good in our bodies, what makes us feel powerful and feel like we have agency around sex and agency in the bedroom. But we can only do that from a position of knowledge and power and the confidence to say no if you don't want to have a sexual experience, or yes because you actually want to have it.
Yeah.
And I think particularly there's such a specific taboo around female pleasure, which I do think is beginning to be challenged just because of the absolute, you know, growth in the sexual wellness industry and a big focus on female pleasure and sex toys. You know, the fact that Harry Styles just brought out a sex toy brand called Pleasing. Like, you know, there's a lot of money being made in this industry now, which I think does have a ripple effect of it normalizing conversations around female pleasure and masturbation, which I think is a really positive thing. But growing up, I certainly felt the taboo around female pleasure was much more acute. And so thus sex did feel very kind of on men's terms. It was very kind of, I felt also it was very performative, and I never really thought about how what I was feeling or enjoying. It was very much how the man was feeling and enjoying it. And I think that is also indicative of a very kind of heteronormative, male-centric sexual script that we've kind of all been handed, that, you know, does also say that, you know, sex is penis and a vagina and that is it.
Yeah.
Which is inherently male-centric in its formulation. Most women can't orgasm without clitoral stimulation. So that isn't a sexual dynamic that is going to be most pleasurable to the majority of women, and yet it's what we're led to believe is the standard formula for sex. And, you know, let's not forget that also discounts any sex that sits outside of that, any kind of, you know, queer sex, everything. So it's just, I think that we're collectively done a great disservice by not having better sex education. And I think that, you know, with that comes a litany of issues, whether that be a feeling of disconnection around sex, lack of agency, feeling like it's performative. All these things for me feel like such an obvious knock-on effect of this lack of, you know, public education and conversation around sex. And I think it feels to me as though you kind of get to your, you know, latter half of your 20s, perhaps early 30s, and suddenly you kind of look up and you think, oh my God, like I have to kind of start again. I have to, you know, unlearn all these very deleterious ideas around sex and bodies and agency and desire, and then start from ground zero, which is quite depressing given how, you know, for me that was I first started becoming sexually active in my teens or like 15. So that was like a good 12, 13 years of feeling no agency, no pleasure, not no pleasure, but like less pleasure than I could have had. But Emily Nagoski, who's a brilliant sex educator who's written the sellout book, Come As You Are and Then Come Together, she has this metaphor that she refers to in her latest book around the kind of garden metaphor. So she talks about our sexuality being a garden, so our garden of sexuality. And she says that when you're born, you're given this fresh, beautiful, pretty empty, lustrous green garden. And over time, society, culture, your family, your friends begin to plant their seeds, which really are kind of weeds of toxic ideas around body, heteronormative scripts around what sex should look like, shame, all these things. And so that one, eventually as you get older, and hopefully you kind of are able to observe that these, things don't reflect your own values, but you look upon your garden and you recognize that it's become overrun by all these weeds, this poison ivy, that it reflects these ideas that aren't your own, but that were handed to you by a society that still doesn't know how to talk about sex. But she says, when you get to that point, it's actually amazing because then you can begin the work of weeding. So then you begin to rip up those toxic plants and you can begin to install ideas that actually correspond with your own sexual value system. And actually, I think when you frame it like that, it feels a lot more, I guess, joyful and much more of a kind of pleasurable task than just fixating too much on the fact that for so many years it was shit.
Yeah. And even just like sexual value system is such an interesting term, because when you were saying we're let down in sex education in the UK, which is definitely true, but it's also like when I think of sex education, it's the putting a condom on a banana that you did at school, and it was very much the biology of how it works.
Yeah.
And actually that whole thing, and definitely my experience has been that that's a tiny, physiology is the tiniest drop for me. So much more of it is relationship to body, relationship to the person,
Totally.
relationship to power. That idea of sexual value system is so interesting, because if you almost had a framework to think into those things and be even decisions of when you engage in sex with a partner, that value system will change so much over your lifetime. How I feel about it at 33 is wildly away from when I was 23.
Totally. 100%. I mean, I think about this often now because I feel like I'm having the best sex of my life now at 33. And I think we're just sold this myth growing up that, the golden years, you're in your 20s, you're living the best years of your life. This is your youth. This is the time to you're so alive, hold on to those years. And God, I think, fuck that. Your 30s are amazing.
Yeah.
Because you are, hopefully you've gone through this period of unlearning. You've done your Emily Nagoski weeding of your garden of sexuality, and you're beginning to develop your own sexual lexicon, your value system that allows you to do things to kind of occupy your body on your own terms. And I think when you're able to take that into the bedroom, it totally reframes what sex can be and what it can offer you and what it can look like with a partner in a way that is fantastic.
I wonder if you can shed some light on this, because I find it so interesting that I've been with my husband for 9, nearly 10 years. So
oh wow.
Yeah, I have been having sex with one person for a very long time.
Oh, wow. But has your sex changed a lot in that time?
Oh, so much. Yeah, so much. But what I find so interesting is watching my friends who either they've come out of relationships or they've had shorter relationships, longer relationships, and now they're single. And it's almost like hearing their sex stories and the way that they date and the way that they interact with people, the lens of confidence that it comes through is so different, to the point that they are the big thing in my friendship group is everyone's getting into kink.
Yeah.
Love that for you.
It's been I think Field, the dating app, has done
killing it.
Has had a really important role in, I guess, mainstreaming things that were previously seen as more on the kind of sexual periphery. And I think it's a combination of kind of post-pandemic Field normalizing things, but it's fun. Yeah, I agree. And I think the normalization of sex parties, and I just think anything that encourages people to explore their sexuality in a open-minded and pleasure-led way is such a positive thing.
Definitely.
We should be. We should have been doing this from the get-go.
Yeah, I'm seeing it lots of kink stuff, as you said, Field, sex parties, all that kind of stuff. Then also loads of people exploring their sexuality, in terms of who they want to have sex with. And that, again, to me is super interesting, because I I grew up in Brighton, so like very early on, it was like, well, I just presumed everyone was gay or bisexual. I was like, I didn't know being completely straight was even an option, to be honest. And
yay, go Brighton!
It's the best place. So then seeing friends do that, and I'm like, wow, that must be a result of confidence and finding yourself and all those things. And the other one was also polyamory and opening up relationships as well, like how people can now build a different role around sex outside of their relationship is fascinating to me. I'm like, oh my God, people are doing so much in their 30s.
And I think that really speaks to, I think it speaks to a number of things. I do think kind of broader societal cultural shifts have occurred that have probably made these conversations a bit more mainstream in a way that then gets people thinking like, oh, maybe I could do that. Maybe I could go to the sex party. Maybe I could go there, whatever. But I also just think, I mean, there's so, and the fact that even more people are staying single longer and thus probably do have more time in a part of their lives where they're a bit more, they've had more time to do that unlearning. They've had more like time being, independent and therefore actually able to go into relationships with a little bit more maturity and experience that I think is, a really positive thing. Like I'm the, person I'm with now, we met I was 32 when we met, so a year ago. And he's dating a completely different person to the person I was 5 years ago, let alone so I think that, not saying that you can't change in a long-term relationship, but, I think that for me, like I came into myself and then we met, and that obviously then has a big impact on what I'm going to be like in the relationship, but also what I'm going to be like with regards to sex, not obviously because of, sex therapy as well. I feel like, so this notion of the sexual script is this idea, I don't know who coined that term actually. I get so frequently used at sex talks that I've kind of internalized it and just, it's part of my lexicon without me thinking. But all this wonderful sex therapists I interview from Karen Gurney and Kate Moyle always use this notion of the sexual script, which is basically this kind of body of ideas and ideals around what sex should look like, that we all kind of implicitly get handed at a very young age. Like, this is what sex looks like, and this is what it's going to be like, and this is what your response to sex should always be like. Right. This is what relationships should look like. And we end up kind of acting out this sexual script because we think this is what we have to do. And then we, we're met with lots of kind of dead ends because we think, well, actually, this doesn't really work. I don't like this. I'm not enjoying this. And, the work that we have to do is challenging that sexual script, challenging the script that we get given and say, actually, I didn't write this. I don't want this. I want to do things differently. And I think, particularly when it comes to relationships, like I love that people are beginning to explore what relationship style suits them as opposed to just following that script that says success in life looks like meeting a partner, dating, getting a cat, moving in, getting engaged, getting married, having a baby. That's amazing. And that works for loads of people. Of course it does. Throughout history, people have been very happy, but that's not the only route to happiness, either personally or in a relationship context. There are loads of different, we're all so fundamentally different. Again, what works for one person isn't going to work for someone else. But it feels like, too often we get like modeled from a kind of cultural perspective, from a, what we see on TV, what we read about in books, what we're taught about school. It presents us with this very narrow view of what a successful life looks like. And I think particularly for women, that is so often pegged to these quite arbitrary milestones that are often to do with relationships and babies. And actually, success looks so different for so many different people. And there's so many different metrics of success that we can begin to measure our lives by that take us out of that, off that relationships escalator that makes us think that the only way is, boyfriend, husband, baby, which is, And so I think if, someone's exploring polyamory, desire, etc., fuck yes, more power to them, because even if it ends up that you don't want that, even if you end up in a monogamous straight relationship, just as you assumed you might be 10 years ago, at least it's done from a position of consciousness and it's been an active choice as opposed to you just kind of fall into it, without thinking. So I think that's, an amazing thing.
100%. And if people were listening to this and thinking like, okay, I have been in a relationship for a really, really long time and like things are maybe not as spicy and exciting as they used to be. Is that something that you've come across and had talked about with your guests?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It's a question that comes up all the time. I literally just wrote a piece on this actually the other day for Stylist magazine and interviewed a wonderful Kate Moyle sex therapist about this, because the most predictable thing, she said actually, in a relationship is that sex will change. Sex will change. I mean, our desire for sex will change, month to month. It will change day to day. Again, for women, particularly depending on where we are in our cycle, loads of things affect our desire for sex. Stress, hormones, what's going on in your personal life, loads of different things. And in the context of a long-term relationship, of course, you're not early on when you can't take your hands off one another. You're just being, you're because you're thinking about sex all the time with them. You're just like, it's exciting and it's new. That is not sustainable. And thank God, because it's so distracting. Like it takes
wouldn't get any work done.
Oh my gosh, my productivity dips dramatically when I'm in the early stage of a relationship and just like having sex all the time now. Like it really does. And it's wonderful. And like, it's one of the joys of being alive. But that's obviously not sustainable. And so I think, with long-term relationships, it's really important to acknowledge the fact that it's really normal that it's going to change and it's going to evolve. And often it just requires a bit more intentionality, because at the beginning, there's going to be much more spontaneous desire, which is this notion discussed by Dr. Emily Nagoski. I think she took it from Rosemary Batten. But this idea of our central response system, aka what turns us on our accelerators versus what kind of turns us off our brakes. And early on, your sexual stimuli with a person is going to be, you're going to be always, your accelerator is always going to be pushed because you're hot for them, you want them, you desire them. Over time, lots of other things will feed into it. So I think the key thing is sustaining the erotic energy. And there's lots of ways. Dr. Karen Gurney talks about this with regards to sexual currency, which is the kind of erotic connection we maintain outside of the bedroom in a long-term relationship, when a lot of that relationship will probably be, have you put out the bins? Have you taken the kids to school? Have you ordered new cupboards? A lot of like life admin becomes a bigger feature in a relationship. But sexual currency is a way of those small things that we can do day to day that keeps up that sexual tension. So, she says that can be something like a snog before that person goes to work in the morning. Or like, I love snogging.
People need to snog more.
Snogging and fingering. The most underrated, best things ever. But they're things that you can do, or like, grabbing with consent and grabbing your partner's butt before they, like when they're doing the dishes. Like having like a proper like hold or hug, like just flirting a little bit, really like make sure that day to day, even outside of the context of having sex, you're still maintaining that kind of eroticism within the relationship. And then also bringing in different things. So again, sex that becomes predictable, that becomes boring. It's easy to get into a routine. You know what gets you off, what gets them off, and you kind of get into your routine. But you have to break things up a bit. You have to break that predictability. You've got to try new things. And that could be bringing in a new toy. That could be going to a sex party. That could be watching some erotic content together. Erica Luss, paid for porn, independent platform, feminist pornography, fantastic. There's lots of ways in which I think you can recharge a relationship with a new erotic dynamic that, you always want to be basically keeping things feeling a little bit fresh.
For me, like the massive thing was learning that, or getting comfortable with the idea that it doesn't always have to lead to sex. I built up something in my head of like, with my partner, like when we've been together like nearly 10 years, so like we've had ebbs and flows when we're having more sex, less sex, as you do. And there were some times where I'd be like, oh, well, I don't want to do too much, because then if we don't have sex, like he'll be disappointed. And I think people listening will relate to this, is you can then almost get to the point where you don't want to be too flirty or something, because you don't want to then be like, oh, but I actually don't feel amazing. I just wanted to do like something, and like the snogging is such a good one, because now I'm always just like, oh, can we just snog in the kitchen? Because it's like you're not suddenly probably going to have sex in the kitchen in the middle of the day when you've got a work call in 20 minutes. Maybe you do, like, but it's more often not going to be that. But making like those moments of connection that not everything has to lead to sex.
100%. I love that you said that. Because sex can be kind of time consuming. Yeah. Like sometimes I feel like in a rush.
Especially as a woman.
Yeah,
like, I need 20 minutes to warm up.
I need time to warm up. I need time to go like pee afterwards, have a shower. I completely agree. And I think it's, there's loads, like sensuality transcends fucking. Intimacy transcends actual physical connected sex. Like there's, I think intimacy can mean so many different things day to day. And I think actually it's really about, in long-term relationships, like keeping the intimacy alive and really nurturing the intimacy. And that is often in the day-to-day things that live outside the bedroom. And I think also like a little flirt is so nice, and it doesn't have to mean that you end up going upstairs. Like, no, it can just be that you just remember. I think also it really helps when you get to see your partner in like a different light. So I often think like if you go, especially if you've been together for a while, when you go to like a party, for example, with them, and you see them talking to someone else across the room, and you just suddenly see them a bit like from the vantage point of a stranger, and it's so erotic because you're seeing them as you first saw them when you met early on, and that's so fun.
That's such a hard relate to that. I was literally saying to my husband the other day, he's a touring DJ, and I was like, I think one of the things that's worked so well for us is that every time I like see him playing, I was like, That's hot.
That is so hot.
I'm going to shag the DJ later.
Him. You're going to shag the DJ. That is so cool. That's such a move.
It is that just like that other light of seeing them doing their thing and their confidence and and obviously looking good and other people around,
appreciating them for that.
Exactly. Yeah. Like a little, I'm very much like not a jealous person whatsoever, but a little bit of like, just a reminder of like
100%.
Still a catch.
You want to see people flirting with your boyfriend. I do. I'm like, great. I know. I definitely can get, I think everyone has a capacity for jealousy, but I'm not like super, super jealous, but I kind of like being like, put my foot to the flame a little bit.
Yeah.
Just it's because it's fun. You want to see them being desired by other people, to be reminded of how desirable they are. And the fact that you get to come and fuck them is such a privilege.
Exactly. It's a winner. So one thing that everyone's talking about, like in the news, is obviously really good sex comes from intimacy, or, sex in general should come from a level of intimacy. It seems like we're in a intimacy crisis, or at least that's what everyone's talking about, that like young men. I actually read a really interesting thing that half of all Gen Z and a third of millennials said they would be willing to give up sex for a year if it progressed them towards one of their life goals. So I think the examples they gave were a promotion, buying a house. Like half of Gen Z and a third of millennials were like, I could completely wipe sex off the table to get there. So there's almost like there's this hustle culture playing in, but there's also a lot of dating dynamics that are difficult and perceptions put on men, and like where do you think the world is going in terms of like keeping connection? And
I mean, how long do we have? It's a huge question, and it's a really important one. I think it's one that we all need to have so front of mind, because technology is so fundamentally changing how we do absolutely everything, not least how we connect to our fellow human. And this is being played out across the board. And I think that romantic relationships often shine a magnifying glass on broader social, cultural happenings, because they're kind of like a concentrated space in which our relationships are really tested in a kind of more profound way. And I think, we see across the board, we're all on our phones the whole time. I'm, on my phone, my screen time is actually appalling right now, but we're on our phones, we're on our laptops. That is a inherently solitary experience. And not least we're living in these algorithmically programmed digital worlds, each of which looks different. Like your algorithm is programming for you a very different world than my algorithm is programming for me. And so we're all operating in these really like these little digital bubbles that are connected in this digital ether, but not in person. And so I think it's a really big problem. And I think that, there are many wonderful things about technology that allow us to connect and meet people we might not otherwise be able to come across, to discover, things like sex talks rely so much on social media. But also I think for me, what is so important is how we use the technology. And for me, that is about using it as a way to connect and then taking it offline. That's why offline experiences are so fundamental. We cannot just spend our lives speaking, connecting, existing in an online format, because it lacks all the other kind of the sensory experience that is connecting with another human. Yeah. And I think, that's what I often say about things like, dating. I do think dating apps have fundamentally changed the dating landscape in a way it's kind of hard to come back from. And I think have created, to some degree, a kind of sense of like infinite possibility when you perceive yourself as having the whole world of single people at your fingertips. Hence, there's, you always feel like Mr. Perfect is always kind of one swipe away. Why would you ever stop swiping? And I think that often creates a sense of, well, one, like total overwhelm, but also you're always going to be more dissatisfied with whoever and whatever is in front of you. It's much harder then to actually make the most of the connections you do have. So I think there is that, but I think also they do allow people to meet a range of other people that might not cross their paths day to day. So I just think it's about, again, just if you're on dating apps, use them to just get off the apps as quickly as possible and meet up with people and have real conversations. But one of the biggest issues that we face today is the technologization of society, the contentification of everything. Yeah. I don't think there is one answer to it, but I just think on a personal day-to-day basis, it's about what actually the sustenance that in-person relationships, both romantic and platonic, familial, community-orientated, what they give us. I mean, the pandemic shone such a light on that. Let us not forget that. And I think it's really being so intentional about nurturing that, those in-person connections. And I think we are seeing lots of evidence to suggest that. Like there's a real, surge in attendance of online events. Yeah. Great for me. People, lots of dating communities that are now springing up. They're all about meeting in person. Lots of running clubs. So I think there is this real visceral urge. People want connection. People want community. And I think it's just about, really like leaning into that and not just existing in a kind of little digital bubble.
100%. If someone's listening to this, I guess is a little kind of close to the wrap up, but if someone's listening to this and they're like, I actually feel quite disconnected from my sexuality, and whether they are single or been with a partner for a really long time, is there any like small things that if they were like, oh, I can't go and see a sex therapist at the time or the budget,
of course.
What are like the small things that you're like, this is worth doing?
So what I really recommend is engaging with conversations around sex and intimacy and pleasure, whatever way you engage things, whether that's reading a book, listening to podcasts, going to events, watching programs, watching movies, whatever you're inclined to do from a kind of content consumption base, just enter yourself into little pockets of spaces where people are talking about sex in a really open, exploratory, curiosity-led way. So I think that what that does is it gets us thinking about sex in a way that then puts it kind of front of mind where perhaps we've deprioritized it, or if we are feeling that disconnect, we basically need to work out how we kind of bring that kind of sex conversation back into our lives. I think that is something that we can do if we want to do it alone first, we want to do it outside the context of a partner or whoever. Just start personally engaging those conversations, get used to talking about those topics again. And then also that's a really great way if you are in a romantic relationship to then be able to bring up to a partner and say, oh, I listened to this amazing podcast the other day where they discussed kink, or they discussed these cards, which, you can get sex cards. I'm going to make some, but I haven't done them yet. These sex cards that ask prompts that get people talking about their sexual fantasies together, for example, in a couple dynamic. So there's lots of ways in which I think, just begin, building up that sex as a conversation again personally, and then bring that into your partner relationships.
It's almost like, and have a look at your garden and your
exactly.
Your
going back,
values.
It's such a great analogy. I love that Emily Nagoski notion of the garden, because it's like begin to, I think that's that kind of like spiritual thing they say, where energy goes, where attention goes, energy flows. And so I think we are all busy. I mean, as you said, hustle culture, people feeling like I'm not surprised at that stat, by the way, because I think there's also a scarcity culture that's been created in our society in which things are so expensive. It's so scary. This idea of home ownership being increasingly out of reach for young people, scarcity of jobs in the job market, lots of things changing. I think there's a real fear that a lot of people harbor around their future prospects. And I think, it is a really hard time in economic climate. That doesn't exactly inspire sensuality, does it? It puts you into a scarcity mindset where you think how am I going to build a life for myself? So I think that is, again, stress is a massive inhibitor to sexuality, to sensuality. So I'm not surprised to hear that. But again, it's, where our attention goes, energy flows. So I think if you're feeling disconnected from your sexual self, put attention in that direction. Just begin thinking about what your sexuality means to you, what it looks like, what it feels like. And I think then it kind of has a bit of a kind of domino effect in your life that then gets you, asking yourself questions, thinking about what you might like, fantasizing. And then once you begin doing that, I think it becomes, the energy flows.
Some erotic novels.
Oh, and erotic.
So
everyone's getting into smut now. And there's a new a shop in Chelsea, I believe, that's called Saucy Books, the first bookshop dedicated solely to books around romance and sex. So get yourself there, read some smart.
So we're going to go on to Yes or Mess, which is our rapid fire section.
Okay, great. Love
but
rapid
just
fire.
Before that, if you could tell your 20s self one thing about sex and body confidence, what would that be?
Oh, I love this question. There's so much I would tell her. She was so misguided, but we learn. I would tell her, I would say, get curious about your body and what you like. And that will feel really scary at first because you've not approached your body from a place of curiosity before. It's always been from a position of judgment and, as I said, through kind of seeing your body through a prism of like punishment and, self-discipline. But actually reframe things and begin asking yourself, get curious about what you want from sex and begin being a bit exploratory. Like next time you have sex with someone, think about what actually feels good and then say it. And if something doesn't feel good, say it. And I think I just really encourage her to be a bit more vocal in partnered sexual situations, and then also to spend a bit more time self-pleasuring to figure out what feels good in her body, because I think it took me until my like very late 20s, early 30s to really begin doing that. And I think, you know, we, as I said earlier on the podcast, we get one body, and, you know, it's our duty to figure out what that body needs and wants and what makes it feel good. So spend time doing that.
I love that. I feel like this is what always happens on the pod. It's like all of the topics we go into, it ends up being like, yeah, you have to be conscious about things. You have to
be intentional
thoughts and intention and decide what you want, and own, like, from that place is where you get pleasure or joy or the outcomes that you want.
Because there's no stock answer for anything, because everyone's experiences are different. We're all showing up today in a way that reflects our different experiences, our different life experience, our different sensations, our different relationship to our body, friends, relationship, everything. And so I think, you know, it's a very normal kind of innate human desire to want answers. I want someone to tell me how to lead a good life. I would love someone to tell me, this is exactly what you should do to build a really successful business with X, Y, and Z. Here, if you want a successful life, here is it. But there is no such thing. Everyone's roadmap is going to be different. Everyone's strengths are different, weaknesses are different, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think just really kind of leaning into our intuition. I think our intuition is, you know, really our kind of body and mind connecting and really telling us what we want and what we don't want.
Okay, let's go into yes or mess. So if you agree with these statements, there's 5 of them.
Yes.
If you agree with it, say yes. If you don't, say mess. Okay, so number 1, scheduling sex to keep it regular.
Yes, if that's what you need to do to have sex that you like regularly.
Doing an abstinence period.
Yes, if you need a bit of time to focus on yourself and your connection to your body outside the context of partnership.
For yourself, would you ever, yes or mess?
A period of abstinence? I've had loads of periods of abstinence. Girl, I had like half my 20s was abstinence.
Yeah, that's fair, that's fair.
Yeah, for sure. I think once you get out the habit, it's you know, I think, again, your sexual connection to yourself transcends sexual partnership. I think it can be, you know, you can keep alive the like sexual fire without someone there.
I love that message, actually. 3, posting a thirst trap to your Instagram.
Hell fucking yes. Have you seen my Instagram? Like, yeah.
Everyone's going to hear that now and straight away be like, Emma-Louise Boynton.
Yeah, and actually all I've got at the moment is like me doing explainer videos. So like not that thirst trappy, but like go to my holiday snaps.
I love a thirst trap. Number 4, bit left field, but moving abroad right after a breakup.
Yeah. For sure. Love a reinvention. I'm a Gemini. I love a transformation. Hence why I've got a bob and a fringe, which did not exist 6 months ago.
Also, I love that you came and you're like, I'm obsessed with my bob.
Yeah, I am obsessed with my bob, but like catch me tomorrow and I'll hate it and I'll want to change. So I might be in a wig next time you see me.
I understand. I'm also a Gemini, so I can relate. And number 5, sleeping with someone because you're not sure if there is chemistry.
Again, sorry, everything requires a bit of nuance. If you want to have sex and the other person wants to have sex and there's enough there for you to feel like it's something worth doing, like, go for it. I don't think that you should force yourself to have sex with someone in order to see if somehow some sort of erotic spark manifests through having sex. Never have sex you don't want to have. It should just be our golden rule. If your body is telling you, and your body always tells you that you don't want it, don't do it. But if you're curious and you're horny, like, fuck it, go for it.
Yeah, but don't use it to maybe, if you're really like, oh,
if you've got, no, I think if you have the ick and you're thinking, I don't want to do this, I should just, you know, force myself to have sex. I'm like, it's a terrible idea. It's also going to be really awkward and weird and horrible. No, I think you should only have sex when you really want to have sex and the other person wants to have sex. And it might not be that you really fancy this person, but you have, you know, a connection and energy between you two that you know, makes it feel like a safe, enjoyable place. But yeah, don't force yourself to have sex you don't want. That idea.
Amen to that. Well, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
I hope that everyone at the end of this podcast, go and have a little masturbate.
Yeah, go and get your vibrators out. Fabulous.
Take 10 minutes.
Exactly.
That would be the one
minimum.
action. That's
minimum.
That's your homework.
Yeah, minimum. Exactly. Go away and masturbate. That is a wonderful piece of homework for a Tuesday afternoon.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.